안녕하세요. 이제
Good
2020
morning,
글로벌
ladies and
코리아
gentlemen.
박람회 한 유럽
We are going to
청년
begin
세션을
the
시작하겠습니다.
ASEAN Korean
우선
cooperation
안내
session of the Global Korea
말씀드리겠습니다.
Convention
오늘 행사는
2020.
코로나19 바이러스 확산 방지를 위한
In
정부
order to
방역
prevent
지침을
the
준수하고
spread of
있습니다.
COVID-19, we
착용하고
have
계신
in
마스크는
place
코와 입을 완전히
stringent
덮어주시고
disease
발표
control
시에도 반드시 착용해
measures.
주시기
Please
바랍니다.
keep your masks on all the way up
또한
to your
오늘
nose,
컨퍼런스는 홈페이지와
even while you're
유튜브를 통해
presenting.
국문과 영문
And
실시간으로 생중계되고
our
있습니다.
session is
따라서
being live
발표
streamed
접근
on
시께서는
the
발표
YouTube
시간을
channel
없애주시기 바랍니다.
in both Korean and English
그리고
languages.
한영 동시 통역이 제공되고 있습니다.
We're
한국어
providing
채널은
simultaneous
7번이고 영어
interpretation. You
채널은
can access
8번입니다.
Korean on channel
We have
7
a
and English on channel 8.
translation between Korean and English. For Korean, please set your channel to 7, and for English, please set your channel to 8. 안녕하십니까? 저는
Good
이번
morning, ladies
세션의
and
사회를
gentlemen.
맡은 대외경제정책연구원의 조동희라고 합니다.
My name is
반갑습니다.
Dong-hee Cho,
우선
and I'm
본격적인
from the
발표와
Korea
토론에
Institute
앞서서
for International Economic Policy. I will be moderating
대외경제정책연구원의
today's
김흥종 원장님을
session.
모시고
I would
대회사를
like
듣도록
to invite
하겠습니다.
Mr. Hong Jong Kim, who is the president of Kiev, who will be delivering the opening remarks.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Kim Hong-jong, President of Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. First of all, I'd like to extend my warm welcome to all of you who are participating in this session online and in person. In particular, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Bohart, Head of Political Press and Information Section of the EU delegation to Korea. Thank you for coming. I would also like to thank the presenters and discussants of this session who have overcome the difficulties caused by the COVID-19 and gathered to discuss Korea's cooperation with Europe in this session. Although this session is about the cooperation between Korea and EU, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all of you that this session is being held under the scheme of the Global Korea Convention 2020. So I'd like to address what is the Global Korea Convention briefly. Okay, so I'd like to read the key notes of the explanation of the Global Korea Convention, and then also explain the vision statement. What is the main contents of the vision statement? Okay. Now, more than ever, the global community as a whole is being tested in our ability to adapt and cooperate together against a common challenge. The trials before us transcend borders, ideologies, and perceived differences, and affects us all equally across all aspects of life. In these troubling times, Korea records its own history of hardship, and there exists a common understanding amongst Koreans that without the cooperation and aid of the global community, we may have never been able to build Korea as we know today. Carrying a sense of responsibility commensurate with the progress it has made, Korea is now working together with the international community to bring about peace and prosperity in the whole world. Our commitment is carried out into action by not only the national government, but also by municipal governments, public institutes, private companies, and extraordinary individuals. 2020 marks the 10th year's anniversary of Korea joining the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD, a historic milestone that marks the first case in which the recipient became an aid donor. And with the backdrop of the ongoing global crisis, we believe that it is time to review our efforts, re-establish our vision, and reaffirm our commitment to cooperation and mutual prosperity. Thus, the Global Korea Forum, a collective organization of more than 150 Korean institutes with a voluntary commitment to international cooperation, with the sponsorship of the Korean government, will be hosting the 2020 Global Korea Convention. At this convention, more than 150 Korean institutes will join. Together we discuss how we can help. Each institute will be showcasing its best practice based on its own areas of expertise. Experts and scholars will gather to discuss the formulate common strategy to solve global agendas. And most importantly, the convention will be the venue for the declaration of the global Korea vision. So I'd like to remind you that there were 5 vision. Key notes of the vision was announced in the first day of this convention. The first one is we should build our cooperation on the basis of inclusive multilateralism. So the first principle of our action is the inclusive multilateralism. And second, we shall pursue sustainable development as an action agenda based on inclusive values and norms to alleviate confrontations and conflicts. So sustainable development is our second pillar of the vision. And the third, we shall strengthen international cooperation and solidarity to expand global public goods in the post-COVID-19 era. So expanding global public goods is our third pillar of the convention. And fourth, we must promote the global social value centered on peace. So global social value based on peace is our fourth pillar of the convention. And fifth, we need to strengthen inclusive partnership based on mutual accountability. So inclusive partnership based on mutual accountability is our fifth vision, the principle of the vision. And so under this big scheme, this Korea-EU cooperation session will be given to you. So I'd like to remind you that all of these kind of principles should be incorporated with our discussions in this session of the cooperation between the two continents, two countries. Thank you very much.
김웅종 원장님 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for your warm opening remarks.
We will invite Mr. John Bohart from the EU delegation to deliver a congratulatory remark.
Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for the honor for speaking at this event. Thank you, President Kim, for those words and for setting out what we are aiming to achieve here. And I think the 5 pillars that you set out, I think, are among the pillars that in fact the European Union is built on, and exactly indeed what we hope to achieve through EU-Korea cooperation as well. I hope you'll be able to understand me well. I'm a Dutch national, and we are known for not articulating very well, but I will do my best to be as understandable as possible. So thank you once again to the Global Korea Convention, to Kiev for organizing this event and for giving me the honor of talking to you today on EU-Korea relations. In fact, it's a very special year for EU-Korea relations. We mark the 10th anniversary of the signing of our strategic partnership. This, of course, 10th year has been a difficult one, but as it comes to an end, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of the discussions here. Looking forward to a hopefully brighter future. The strategic partnership between the EU and Korea is a highly valued declaration in our EU-Korea relations, and has played a vital role in moving these relations forward, and has given substance to our relations, political commitment and dynamism in our joint action. So 10 years ago, we signed, the EU and Korea signed, and I was actually there when it happened, for part of it at least, the Korea-EU Free Trade Agreement, the political framework agreement for cooperation, and later on the crisis management agreement. And with that, we elevated our relationship to that of a strategic partnership, which we do not have with everyone. So it's really a sign of the importance that the EU attaches to its relations with Korea, meant to boost our bilateral cooperation and to work together on issues of regional and global significance. In uncertain times like this, the ones that we are living through at the moment, a truly strategic and like-minded partnership is essential, and it's more important than ever that we work together. The pandemic has accelerated some of the global dynamics for the good and for the bad, I would say, but it does threaten to erode the international order that was already referred to. So what do we think that our strategic partnership means and should mean today? Well, as was mentioned before, we think it should be very much working together to restore multilateralism. There are less and less partners in the world that value this rule-based multilateral system, but I think the EU and Korea are essential partners within that, and we should do everything in order to get back to where we were a little bit before, and not only that, but try to improve it as well. So we should reinforce our cooperation in support of that, and we should also shoulder our responsibility in addressing the many global challenges we are facing. I mean, one of the key global challenges, of course, that we have, for which we sometimes say that there will never be a vaccine, is the one of climate change. And we feel that we should push together for a green recovery and fight against climate change. The EU and Korea have the same goals, carbon neutrality by 2050, and we are both working towards an agenda for green and digital recovery. Yesterday, the Korean president once again confirmed the target of zero carbon and carbon neutrality by 2050, and of course we very much welcome that as the EU. And we do hope that maybe not yet this year, but in the coming 12 months, these aspirations will become formalized in the Paris Agreement, and will really become more concrete, and will be reflected in concrete plans and targets and concrete implementation. Beyond that, the EU and Korea both support open markets, fair, sustainable trade. We have maintained very good balance in trade, but bilateral trade surging almost 50%. That's of course all post-COVID. We have to see how the pandemic will have influenced our trade. But in any case, EU and Korea are very, very close and important trade partners, with the EU being Korea's third largest export market and in fact the highest foreign direct investor. Next year, this year, it was 10 years ago that we signed it, but next year the FTA, the Free Trade Agreement, will be in force for 10 years, and we consider it a success story. It was the first of its kind in Asia and a model for other countries, and we hope that will be continued. Some of these, we can always do better. Some of the parts of the trade agreement are not yet fully implemented, such as the sustainable development chapter. There we can do more work and ensure that the FTA delivers to its full potential. I think security was referred to as well. There on security, the EU and Korea also work together. As I mentioned, we have an agreement whereby we can join forces in international operations, and in particular, there's a cooperation with the Korean Navy joining the EU Operation Atalanta, fighting piracy off the coast of Somalia. But also in cyberspace, I think where Korea has a very, very strong expertise. The EU and Korea recognize the need to address key challenges and increasing challenges, and to enhance our resilience towards these cybersecurity threats, and to intensify cooperation in the international field, but also amongst us. And so we actually have a program on offer where we would like to increase our cooperation between EU and Korea in the field of security, and cyber will be there, hopefully one of the areas where we can develop joint initiatives. So security in Asia matters very, very much to the EU. I know that in Korea there is always one thing that always comes up, and that is, of course, peace on the peninsula. This is also something that the EU is very much invested in, and we are there to contribute to finding a lasting solution, and to be supportive of the hard work that is being done by the Korean government. And we do think, the EU is basically a project of peace. We are now successfully managed to get countries together that used to fight each other for centuries to work well together in a communal spirit for almost 70 years now. So we are very willing to, if it's considered useful by all parties, of course, to bring our experience also to Korea and to help and bring peace and stability to the Korean Peninsula. Something a little bit more hands-on, research and innovation, another significant field of our cooperation. We share a digital agenda for recovery, innovation, research. We have a number of projects, Horizon Europe. You may know this, it's a research and innovation program that is meant also to encourage international cooperation in different fields, and in particular in the field of research. So we hope you can continue to use that. I must say that our research programs and also our student programs will be probably suffering a little bit in the next few years due to the COVID pandemic. It will become a little bit more difficult to have real exchanges between our students and our academics, but of course we hope that we can very much continue that and increase that in the near future, because basically the essence of our relationship maintains the relationship between the people of the European Union and Korea. We're talking about business, about research, about students, about artists. We want to put our efforts in enhancing the exchanges between our peoples through cultural cooperation, tourism, architecture, all these things, of course, when the situation will allow it once more. So to slowly come to a conclusion, the EU-Korea strategic partnership is one that is of key importance to us, that keeps moving forward in a good way, in a dynamic way, but we can always do more, and to revitalize it and to get really everything out of it that we can. And so we want to really use this 10th anniversary to continue to put our words into action. And again, we hope that we are now again starting to have more and more meetings, not physical, but through webinars and things like this between EU and Korea, to really put our money where our mouths are, let's say. And as to use the words that I think President-elect Biden uses now as well, but we were using long before, to together build back better. And just to say that, it's not just the EU representation and delegation here, but there are actually 23 out of the 27 member states have embassies in Korea, which I think shows the key interest that we all have in working here. And we are looking forward to use all these efforts and assets to, let's say, the next 10 years. And we count on working with South Korea, both bilaterally, but also very much together into international fields. And we believe and we want to encourage that Korea can become a regional leader in many fields and serve as an example to other partners. So to close with the words that I have said before, I think that Europe very much needs Korea, and we believe that Korea also needs Europe. And I look forward to our exchange today on how we can continue to make best use of the possibilities that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bohart, for the thorough and ambitious remark. 이제 발표자분들을 모시고 발표를 들어보겠습니다.
Now we're going
저희
to
세션에 오늘 총 세 분의
invite the
발표자
presenters to present. We have three presenters today. Our first presenter is Dr. Yu-Duk Kang, who is a professor at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. He's going to present on Korean-EU economic cooperation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me as a presenter to this session where we are going to delve into the cooperation between Korea and EU. I'm going to take a look back at our economic cooperation between Korea and EU. So of all the different areas of cooperation, I'm going to focus on the economic.
예, 제가 준비한 내용을 이제 하나씩 설명드리도록 하겠습니다.
So this is the list of the topics that I'm going to cover. So first I'm going to provide an overview of the Korea-EU cooperation, and there is the Korea-EU FTA, which is entering its 10th year. So I'm going to talk about that as well. And
입장에서 그다음에 유럽에서 가장 중요한
one of the key issue, I believe, is Brexit.
어제도 영국 존슨
Yesterday, Prime Minister Johnson and President von der Leyen had a meeting,
과와 그리고 앞으로의
and we will have to take a look at what happened there and what's going to happen going forward. As you know, there are 27 member economies in EU. Actually, there were 28, but with UK leaving the Union, it's now 27.
공동체, 유럽 경제 공동체
So originally, there was a series of communities that was formed in the Europe, including the EEC, and the number of member countries have continued to grow.
회원국이 탈퇴하는 첫 번째
Now,
사례이자
UK's leaving the EU would be the first example of a member country leaving the Union.
가입 후보국 지위를 가지고 있기
On the other hand, there are other countries vying to become a member of the EU, so I can foresee that the membership will grow.
부분의 국가들은
Most of the countries in EU use euro.
9개 국가가 유로와
Currently, 19 countries use the euro as its currency, and the other countries, due to their economic situation or their wish to maintain currency sovereignty, continue to use their own currency.
연합을 하나의 정치 경제 공동체로서 이해를 하는데
We often see EU as a single economic and political community, but there are significant income disparity across EU.
안쪽에 있는 위치한 국가일수록 소득
And so the income levels are significantly varying across the different parts of EU.
유럽
Many Korean companies often go to the middle or the eastern EU in order to access the lower wages there. The per capita income on average does not paint an accurate picture because the income disparity is quite significant in EU. Now, there are freedoms of movement of products, people, services, and capital. And by people, this also includes workers. So in that sense, there is a significant level of freedom that exists in EU. And also there are significant cooperation in trade, environment, culture, and
형성하고 있기 때문에
policies.
우리가 생각하고 있는 유럽의 범위는 사실상 유럽
And
벗어나는 더
actually, EU has also very, very close relationship with its candidate countries and other European countries that are not members yet. So it's actually a wider community. Now, Korea and EU have signed the Framework Agreement for Trade and Cooperation in 1996, and there was an amendment to that in 2010. And based on this framework agreement, we actually collaborate in political, economic, and cultural aspects, amongst others. And this is the structure of the framework agreement. You can see that it spans across a wide range of areas of cooperation.
그래서 실제로 보면은 매년 또는 경년으로 정상회담이
Each year or biannually, we can see that there has been summit meetings, and also there are high-level, political dialogues and foreign ministers dialogues, and there are various meetings for cooperation at varying levels. And there is a Korea-EU FTA, and there's a trade committee in which the trade ministers of both Korea and EU participate in order to actually implement the FTA. And also, there are varying committees and councils that exist in order to narrow any differences of opinion or perspective. Now, this is about the investment of Korean companies into EU. Because the Western European region is relatively wealthier, there are many sales entities that have presence there. And in the Middle and Eastern Europe, the income level is relatively lower, but it is a region where access to the rest of the Europe is easily gotten. So a lot of the manufacturing entities are present. Again, sales entities tend to be concentrated in the Western European region. So you can see the table for the percentages there. And Korean companies started to build presence in Mid and Eastern Europe since 2004, when those countries became members of the EU. Poland is one of the places where a lot of Korean companies have built presence and invest in. And also, Korean companies often bring other suppliers or vendors with them and invest. So there is a whole supply value chain that have invested in Europe from Korea. And you can see the companies on the map that have presence in Europe. Now I would like to talk about Korea-EU trade. The trade volume has grown over the years. Of course, there has been fluctuations, but it's a growing trend. On the other hand, Korea's import from EU has significantly grown over the years, while our export to EU has come down significantly. So I think the exchange rate has an impact, and overall global economic situation also has an impact. And in the case of Korea's trade balance, we have a trade deficit against Western European countries, whereas there is significant trade surplus with the Middle and Eastern European countries. And a lot of the automotive parts and finished goods that are produced in the Mid and Eastern European countries are then exported into Western European countries. Statistically speaking, we have a trade deficit against the Western countries, but over the entire European region, our trade balance is okay. And with regards to the Mid and Eastern European countries, we have a trade surplus. So there's a lot of investment and trade going on, and oftentimes we have to segregate the data between the Western and the rest of the Europe in order to get a clearer picture. And towards the Mid and Eastern European countries, we export a lot of intermediate goods. And with regards to the Western European markets, we tend to export a lot more finished goods. Now I would like to talk about Korea-EU FTA. I think it's important to look at this important agreement. Our FTA with EU is Korea's first FTA with a major economy. And Korea identifies US, China, and EU as the largest markets with whom to strike FTAs. And the first FTA with the major economy was again with EU. And there were many political issues when we were negotiating with, for example, the US or China. But our negotiations and the whole FTA process with EU has been seen as one of an exemplary one. And Korea was one of the first Asian countries to sign an FTA with EU. And I think we were the first amongst the East Asian countries to sign an FTA with EU. So we sort of set a way forward for this region with regards to EU FTA. And the negotiation with EU and the US were conducted nearly at the same time frame. So the Korean government wanted to coordinate. And if we look at the service chapter of the Korea-EU FTA, you can see that the conditions are almost similar to the Korea-US FTA with some additional provisions. And some provisions require that our local systems had to be amended, and we were looking into both the Korean-US FTA and Korean-EU FTA and tried to strike a right balance so that we could make effective changes in our system. And because EU is such a large economic bloc, we were more ready to change some of our local systems in order to access this large market potential. Now, I would like to talk about the Korea-UK FTA. Korean government started to talk about Korea-UK FTA in 2016 when there were talks about potential Brexit. Currently, it seems that the likely outcome will be a no-deal Brexit. And if a no-deal Brexit were to happen, the Korea-UK FTA will immediately go into effect. To UK citizens, there was a survey conducted asking what they think will be the likely result of the Brexit, and more British people feel that no-deal Brexit is the likely outcome. And in fact, the survey's results for Germans and French also are quite similar. A lot of people are predicting that it will be a no-deal Brexit. And in order to prepare for such a situation, in December 2016, Korea and UK created a working group to talk about a potential Korea-UK FTA. And there was a business case survey that was conducted. And there was also a public hearing held about FTA in 2018. And in June 2019, we actually agreed upon an FTA. It was signed in August, and we have actually gotten the ratification at the National Assembly in December. And so once a no-deal Brexit becomes clear, we would immediately have this Korea-UK FTA go into effect. And in the negotiations, the key priority was on maintaining business continuity between the two countries. And if the relationship between Korea and UK evolves,
기존의 한 EU FTA가
There are certain conditions in the FTA that would allow for some amendments in the future. And also there are recognition of EU content in the UK, and there's also a provision on goods transported through EU may be recognized as having been transported directly between Korea and UK. So these are conditions that are in place to keep business continuity. And also, we import a significant amount of crude oil from UK, and the price of the crude oil does affect our trade balance against UK. And more recently, we have seen significant import and export of automotive and airplane parts. And in Korea, we generally invest in finance and real estate in the UK rather than set up a manufacturing entity in UK. If a no-deal Brexit were to happen, the financial sector passport will be eliminated. So a lot of the investment that was concentrated in the financial sector in UK might be hit by this. So we would have to watch for what happens. The relations, I hope, will continue to be very good between Korea and UK and Korea and EU, because that would bode well for the Korean companies. There are significant value chains that exist in UK and EU. So Korean companies also want relationship between UK and EU to be maintained on very friendly terms. But of course, we would have to see what happens with this Brexit process, and because this would have an impact on both political and economic situations and relations between Korea and EU and UK. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kang, for your presentation, for enlightening us on the economic cooperation between Korea and EU.
The next speaker is going to be researcher Young-uk Jang from Kiev.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
중요한
It is
행사에서
my pleasure and honor to be here as a speaker at this important convention. I'd like to share with you what kind of research is being done at my organization and some implications for the EU and Korea relationships. So the title is The Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on the Migrants in the EU. And in number 2 and 3 parts, it's basically about the current status regarding COVID-19 and the migrant status in the EU. And then in parts 4 and 5, that's actually the main parts of my research. So here, I'd like to touch upon the EU and Korea relations as well. So the COVID-19 pandemic has affected many aspects of life all around the world. I don't think I can highlight that. But immigrants and migrants and immigration and international exchanges were no exception. Particularly, the EU is highly integrated in terms of labor mobility. So as you can see here, the share of foreign population in the EU countries is around 13%. And whereas the world average is about 3.5%, in Korea, foreign population accounts for 2.3%. And 1/3 of those immigrants are born within EU regions. So EU has really active human-to-human exchanges. So, but a lot of travel restrictions were put in place in response to COVID-19, and these travel controls impacted human-to-human exchanges, and that also impacted the lives of immigrants and migrants, of course. I used to work in South Africa before joining Kiev, but then the COVID-19 outbreak happened in South Africa, and then border control were in place. So we couldn't travel. We were going to travel before coming to Korea, but we couldn't. And so we were kind of locked in. And me and my family, we were locked in at home. And even though already I was going to come to work at Kiev in Seoul, but still I couldn't travel back then. So that was a really an example, my own first-hand experience of travel control. So in terms of the COVID-19 situation in the EU, now EU is going through the second wave. The first wave took place from March through June. France, the UK, Belgium, these countries were hit hard, and the graphs here are showing confirmed case numbers. Sweden as well. If you look at the fatality numbers, the situation is similar. Sweden, the UK, Italy, France, the Netherlands, and these countries were hit hard during the first wave. So when you look at the peak point, it's around April, early April. But if you combine it with the second wave, that earlier peak seems much lower than the current peak. So right now, there is much more confirmed cases and much higher fatality in wider regions in the EU. So Austria, Czech Republic, and Poland, they were doing relatively well during the second wave, but not anymore during the current second wave. And the fatality, if you make a comparison between first and second wave, it's kind of similar. So fatality is kind of similar during the second wave. So that has been a quick overview of the current COVID-19 situation, and that overview is actually a quick summary from this report on the slide. So if you look up this report, you can see more detailed picture of the COVID-19 situation in Europe. So out of the COVID situation in Europe, travel restrictions are relevant to my topic today. So the Oxford University here actually came up with these indicators. So this is an Oxford Stringency Index. It measures how strict the government measures are. So you can see travel restrictions here and travel restrictions on international travel. And also it includes a screening and outright ban as well. So this, of course, impacts the foreign residents in a given country. And also certain sectors are prone to more frequent human-to-human exchanges and human movement, and these sectors were impacted, of course. So this is the stringency index. March and April, the index went up a lot during the first wave, and now it went down. And so this index on the graph, it doesn't show November, December data, but the index went up actually for November and December. And this is about international travel controls. So number one means screening arrivals, and two means quarantine. So people who arrive from foreign countries, they are put into quarantine. And number 3 and 4, or indicator level 3 and 4, it means banning arrivals from different countries. So the higher the number is, the stricter the restrictions are. So as you can see here, certain countries didn't open their borders up until May or June. So that has been so far a quick overview of the travel restrictions due to COVID-19. Now I want to move on to the migrant situation in the EU. As I mentioned earlier, international exchanges or globalization, it's largely it means free trade or free movement of goods and services and people. That's what globalization is about. And this free movement is big part of globalization. And particularly EU is known for really active human-to-human exchanges and travel. And you can see some numbers here from the past. And in 2019, around 21.8 million non-EU citizens are living in one of the EU member states, and 13.3 million EU citizens living in another EU member state. So this really gives you an active picture of human-to-human exchange and human movement in the EU. This is the share of the foreign population in EU. So in Western European countries, the share is higher, and the share is relatively lower in Eastern European countries. This is a time series data. Excluding Eastern Europe, you can see a steady increase in the foreign population, and particularly foreign population from other EU member countries is quite high. In Western Europe, it's over 6%. In Eastern Europe, it's relatively lower. In Southern Europe and Northern Europe, the level is in between. Again, another time series data of share of EU national foreign population. Among the EU countries, these 5 countries actually host the highest portion or highest number of foreign population. Luxembourg, Malta, Cyprus, Austria, and Sweden. And bottom 5 are Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovenia, Lithuania. So this is a net migration. So far, I talked about the stock kind of number of foreign population. So this is actually a factor of migration and representing the border openness and diversity of the receiving countries. But if you look at the net migration, this is, you just saw the formula, and according to the net migration measure, these were the net migration numbers at EU level, and for Western European region and Southern European region. And these numbers, as you can see here, net migration is relatively high in Western and Northern European countries. Southern European countries as well, they also have a net inflow of migrants, but still the number is smaller. In Eastern European countries, they had a net outflow of population. So again, ranking top 5 and bottom 5 ranking
아이슬란드랑 스웨덴,
in terms of the net migration rate
그리고 이제 동유럽
is still similar
국가들은 역시
to what we saw earlier.
유출이 있었던 인구 유출이 있었던
So some countries, for example, bottom 5 here, they're all negative, meaning they had an outflow of population.
왜 이주민한테 더 영향을
So why is COVID-19 impacting more on migrants?
일단 이민자들이
Well, first of all, immigrants or migrants, they're more vulnerable to COVID-19 infection and fatality because they tend to travel more. So they tend to be exposed more to the virus. So they're more vulnerable to the infection.
그리고 예를 들어서 자국에서
And also in their home country,
그런 위생 수칙이나 이런 것들에 대해서 정보
so for example, when they don't receive enough information about hygiene guideline in their host nation, for example, due to language barrier, then that also puts them at a more vulnerable position.
숙소나 이런데
And also immigrants, they sometimes reside in an immigrant concentrated accommodation. So they tend to be vulnerable as well. And many of migrant workers, they work as a key workers, such as care workers, domestic helpers, cleaners, drivers, nurses.
이민자 비중이 높기 때문에
So these are the common occupations among immigrants. So they are vulnerable due to the nature of their work as well. So this is the percentage of immigrant of the total population and the confirmed cases percentage. For example, foreign population takes up 90% out of the total Swedish population at the top of the table, but out of the all confirmed cases, foreign population takes up over 30%. And they are more vulnerable to death due to COVID-19 as well. And immigrants take a high proportion among key workers like domestic workers, domestic helpers, cleaners. So the overall average is very high. So because of these characteristics, immigrants tend to be impacted much more by COVID-19. And also, the more immigrants are, the bigger the impact from the COVID-19 is in a given community. But and also at the same time, when there are a lot of immigrants, then a country is less prone to implement travel restrictions because these immigrants take a bigger share in their economy. So if the government implements travel restrictions, it means a bigger impact on their economy. So due to economic consideration, sometimes they're reluctant to implement travel restrictions. That can lead to bigger impact on the overall nation due to COVID-19. So as you can see here, the higher share the immigrants take in a nation's population, the less stringent the travel restrictions are. But this is not simply because of immigrants' portion, and also immigrants some people might also think that, well, immigrants, a high number of immigrants population means that that host country is a developed nation. Developed nations are strict about travel bans. People often think that, but as you can see here, immigrant share has some kind of a relationship with the travel restrictions. Of course, this topic deserves a more detailed analysis with maybe different measures, but so far this is what we found.
한 국가가 강한 통제 정책을 쓰고 싶냐 안 쓰고
So
싶냐
whether a
국가의 그
country
웰링리스트가
wants
문제가
to
아니라
or is
상황
willing
문제라는
to implement strong travel bans or not, it sometimes depends on how much foreign population resides in the country, because in that case, travel ban can incur high social cost. So I think in this case, in Korea, we had a special entry procedure. For example, we allow foreigners to come in on the condition that they will put themselves in quarantine for 2 weeks.
자가격리 하거나 이런 식으로 합니다. 증상이 없어도
So they get tested upon arrival, upon entry, and if they test positive, then they are segregated and quarantined at a separate facility. If they're tested negative, then they're allowed to go into self-quarantine, for example, even at their home. So the special entry procedure could be perhaps an example that the EU can adopt. So this is the conclusion. So again, COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on immigrants in the EU, and the cost of travel restrictions is likely to be higher if a country has a higher portion of foreign population. So EU needs to come up with a way to minimize the impact while practicing a certain travel restrictions or allow entry.
발표 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jang, for your presentation.
국립외교원의
Our last
전용
presenter for the
교수께서
session
한유
is Professor Haewon Chun from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy.
강의는 같이 하지 못해서
Professor Chun was not able to join us
해주실 겁니다.
here on site, so Dr. Chun will connect via remote.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Haewon Jeon, and I'm very honored to be invited to talk at the Global Korea 2020. 안녕하세요, 전혜원 교수입니다.
Good
제가
morning. I
PPT
am
자료는
Haewon
영어로
Chun. I have prepared my presentation in English, but I believe that since all the presenters and the moderator are speaking Korean, I will also conduct this presentation in Korean. Before I begin, I would like to let you know that this is based on my personal view and it does not represent the view of my academy or the Korean government. The title of my presentation is Security Cooperation Between Korea and Europe, something other than the NK nuclear issue. When we talk about security cooperation between Korea and Europe, often people think it will be about North Korean nuclear issue, because that seems to be the biggest security issue for Korea. But actually, I would like to touch upon some aspects of security cooperation other than with regards to nuclear issues. There are 3 legal frameworks for Korea-EU relations. The first is the political framework agreement, and there's the free trade agreement, of course, and the framework participation agreement. This is for crisis management. So we often refer to this agreement as FPA. Korea and EU's security cooperation is based on the political framework agreement and framework participation agreement. So there's a lot of dialogue which goes on based on this political framework agreement. And the FPA really governs the actual actions of security cooperation. Korea is the first Asian country to have signed all 3 of these agreements with the EU. Now, I am going to focus mostly on FPA and the cooperation activities between Korea and EU based on that FPA. A first example of this is, of course, the Common Security and Defense Policy, the CSDP. This is basically the crisis management missions and operations. So I'm going to talk about that. Now, this is for 2020. If you look at this map, EU's crisis management missions and operations are belong to two categories. One is the military missions and operations, and the other category is crisis missions, and these are more civilian level crisis management. And if you look at the map, mostly these activities are focused on North Africa or Eastern Europe. And as you can see, in the case of crisis management activities, there are military mission and there are civilian missions. And if you look at the areas with stripes, that means both military and civilian crisis management missions are taking place. So it often happens that both military and civilian missions happen on the same ground. Now, you would think that this kind of CSPD missions happen with only EU participation, but actually there are third countries that participate in these activities. In fact, about 45 third countries have contributed to CSDP missions and operations. In numbers, 288 third country personnel have participated as of 2018. And when a third country participates, generally they dispatch less than 20 people. And Korea is one of these third countries that participate in the CSPD missions. Generally, when a third country is participating in an EU-related mission, there has to be a framework participation agreement signed between that country and EU. And this agreement is signed in advance of such participation because if there is no such framework participation agreement, then a separate agreement has to be signed each time a third country is invited to participate in an EU CSPD mission. So a framework participation agreement is an overarching agreement that is signed in advance so that any time that a country needs to participate in a CSPD EU, that will be governed under this framework agreement. So framework participation agreement, once it's signed, the EU can ask the countries whether they would like to join missions. So I'm going to talk later about how this framework participation agreement governs these missions. Now, US is one of those countries that have an FTA with EU, and then there are non-EU European countries, and also there are other countries outside of the European region that have signed FTA. The US has been involved in security cooperation on the Balkan Peninsula with the EU. And also the candidate countries have signed FTA with EU. More recently, countries outside of Europe, such as Korea, Vietnam, Australia, and have been signing the FPA with EU. Most recent addition to the list of countries that have signed FPA with EU is Vietnam. Vietnam was the 19th country to sign FPA with EU. And in Asia, The first country to sign this was Korea, and following that was New Zealand and then Australia. Vietnam was the fourth. So let me talk about how FPA takes effect. In order for you to understand what it means for Korea to participate in EU-related missions. So the framework participation agreement allows for selective cooperation. For example, free trade agreement, once it goes into effect, you have to comply with it. You have to act in accordance with it. You may have to change your local laws. You would have to apply customs duties according to FTA. But framework participation agreement is different, because when a third country it defines the rights and obligations for a third country participating in an EU mission. But those rights and obligations are only effective when the third country is participating in a mission, not at other times. And the third countries, when EU invites the third countries to participate, and if and when the third country accepts the invitation, only then does this FPA-based cooperation take place and the rights and obligations become effective. Now, the scope of participation can be determined to a certain extent by the participating third country. And in some instances, even when the third country has already begun to participate, they can request that the extent of their participation be adjusted. The framework participation agreement, if EU feels that a third country should participate in a mission, and if the third country deems that the mission to which they were invited serves their national interest, and if they deem that their capabilities are in line with what's required, only then FPA is really meaningful. So the success of an FPA or the significance of the FPA is determined really after it's been signed and what kind of actions actually do take place between the signing parties. I believe there are three conditions for Korea to participate in the EU's crisis management. First, the operation or mission that EU asks Korea to participate in is in some way connected to Korea's national interest. Of course, such a mission could contribute to global security, but in general, Korea would like to see, the connection with its own national interest and not just broad global security. And also, Korea's knowledge and understanding of the given EU operation and mission has to be in place in order for Korea to make a decision to go ahead with participating in that mission. And also, Korea should have a capacity to participate in order for the country to decide to join in the mission. So the first crisis management that Korea participated in actually met all three conditions that I've listed in the previous slide. Now, in March 2017, the first instance of implementation of the FPA took place. Korea joined the Operation Atalanta, which was targeted against Somalian pirates. So let me talk about the Operation Atalanta. The UN Security Council resolution determined that the maritime security situation in Somalian waters was quite challenging, and so there was this mission to deter piracy. Operation Atalanta, from Korea's perspective, in some sense, served Korea's national interest, and also Korea had, knowledge of the mission enough to decide to join, and also Korea had capacity to join. So first, about the interests. Although Operation Atalanta was for general security purposes, for Korea, this actually had economic interests involved as well, because Korea has many shipping vessels that travel through this region of Somalia impacted by the pirates. In fact, 25 to 30% of its shipment goes through this area. So it's a very, key location. And 68% of GDP of Korea is dependent on foreign trade. Therefore, trade that goes through this region has a significant impact on the Korean economy. Therefore, the Gulf of Aden and this Somalian waters are very critical location. And this was an issue that Korea was willing to participate. So it really did serve Korea's national interest. And the second condition, how much understanding did Korea have of this mission? Well, Korea had previous experience of working as a part of the combined maritime forces and of the contact group on piracy off the coast of Somalia. Therefore, Korea had a pretty good understanding of the kind of operation that would be necessary in this region because of this previous experience. And Korea had already been contributing economically to EU Cap Nestor. So Korea had a very good understanding of EU's activities in this area. Korea participated in Operation Atalanta in 2017, but even prior to that, Korea had been having interactions with various parties that were involved in the region. For example, these pictures are from Korea's participation in the counter-piracy exercise in the Gulf of Aden with German Navy. Korea not only understood what EU's operation would be like in this region, but Korea was also aware of what other non-EU countries would do in such an operation, because Korea had previously conducted a joint exercise with the Ukrainian Navy. Now, finally, the capacity. Korea had, as I mentioned, experience working in this region covered by Operation Atalanta. So Korea had the capacity to be effective in this region. And already Korean Navy was dispatched to this region. So it was very natural and pretty convenient for Korean Navy to get involved in Operation Atalanta. So Korea has been participating in such military CSTB missions, but Korea has not been involved in the civilian missions yet. I talked about how crisis management activities are categorized into the military and the non-military or the civilian missions. And
군사적인 활동에서는 참여를 하고 있는데요.
Korea has been active on the military front, but Korea has not participated in the civilian missions thus far.
왜 하지 않고 있는지
So why not?
잠깐
Is a question that naturally comes to mind. First, in the case of the civilian CSDP missions, in order for there to be a participation, it's really the individuals. So even if the countries have the willingness to get involved, in order for someone to participate in the civilian missions, the persons have to participate in an EU competition process. So on the website, they actually have recruitment done for potential participants in civilian missions. So if Korea gets an invitation from EU to participate in civilian missions, and if the Korean government accepts that invitation, there is still this added process of Korean civilians having to go through this competition process. And for Korea to participate in the civilian mission, we would have to have the private personnel who have the competitiveness to actually be successful in the competition process. In the case of Afghanistan reconstruction team that was sent to Parwan, if we were to participate, we would have to have the necessary people with the necessary experience and capacity.
경찰이나 아니면 사법기관, 다른 사법기관이나
So, for example,
훈련시키는 것이 민감 이주 관리 활동이 주된 활동입니다.
most of the EU civilian missions actually focus on training maybe the police, the local police, and in the case of Korea, we do have some people who have expertise in training foreign nationals, but oftentimes our training for foreigners have been to invite those people to Korea to get trained. But the EU's civilian missions generally involve their experts being sent to the locality and conducting training in the local area. And for Koreans to actually be dispatched to serve as trainers in the local region, we would have to have experts who have the language capabilities and have knowledge of the local culture. So all of this is not easy to have.
예를 들어서 베르나도타 아카데미 같은 스웨덴 베르나도타 아카데미
Bernadotte Academy in Sweden
위관리 활동 훈련기관과 한국
is a training institution that could potentially, I think, work with Korea to nurture such Korean experts that may get involved in such civilian missions. Now, I talked about, some of the actual instances of CSPD involvement by Korea. So I would like to talk about how we could potentially expand. In the last couple of years, we have seen Europe's pivot to Asia. In 2019, EU announced a China strategy, and in the same year, France announced the Indo-Pacific strategies, and October this year, Germany also announced its Indo-Pacific strategies, and EU is now asked to develop Indo-Pacific strategies. And NATO is a transatlantic organization, but a lot of EU member economies are members. And NATO already has relationship with Asian countries through partners across the globe. And in 2019 London Declaration, NATO defined China as a challenge and opportunity. And so NATO is very interested in China and Asia in general. general. So EU's China strategy and the French and German Indo-Pacific strategies and NATO's concern towards China are very visible, and so between EU and Asian countries, there is significant opportunities for dialogue and involvement on security issues, given all of these different strategies. Europe is likely to get more deeply involved in security issues in Asia, and they want to diversify their diplomatic relations, it seems. And so Europe is now more keen to, partner with Asian countries other than China. I am sorry, I'm at my lab right now, and there is this announcement going on which I cannot stop. Apologies. So I'm going to briefly pause while the announcement ends. Apologies, I cannot stop this announcement.
원내 간부님과 교수님께서는 10분 전까지 참석해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 이상은 글로벌 리더십 과정에서 안내 말씀드렸습니다.
So, on behalf of Korea National Diplomatic Academy, apologies for this interruption. It was totally unexpected. Now, in conclusion, the existing dialogue between Korea and EU and the cooperation based on FTA should be expanded to foster greater understanding of culture and expansion of activities. And I think it will have significance in the context of EU's security involvement in Asian region as a whole. Thank you very much, Dr. Chun. We are going to begin our panel discussion. But as you can see from the agenda, we have been delayed by quite a bit. And so we were going to begin the discussion at 10:05, but it's already 10:36. So we are going to extend our session to 10:50. And we cannot go beyond that because there's another session due to begin at 11 in this same room. So we're going to continue our discussion till 10:50.
President Kim of Kiev as the moderator of the discussion, and Mr. Bohart from the delegation as a discussant, Professor Changyung Oh from Korea University as a discussant, and Dr. Jo, which is myself from Kiev, as a discussant.
네, 지금 토론 시간입니다.
So now we are beginning the discussion session, but we have only about 15 minutes. So please limit your comment to 3 minutes.
Less than 5 minutes.
And so hopefully we can observe the time limit.
For your discussion, 3 to 5 minutes, please.
Okay, so I understand that I should briefly comment on the different presentations. Just to start with the first, I think it's positive. We share, I believe, the analysis that both the EU and Korea share in a balanced manner of our FTA in an increased cooperation. On the issue of Brexit, you understand that this is a highly sensitive matter at the moment, but I do have a slightly more optimistic outlook still, as it is in my experience. Having worked long in the EU, one of our main strengths is that whenever we enter a room, we leave it with an agreement. And I think also in EU-UK relations we have managed to do so. So despite the political posturing that accompanies such a process, I do very much hope that we will continue to be close. Well, I'm convinced that we will, in any case, continue to be close partners between the EU and the UK. Maybe on the second presentation, there was not a large EU-Korea aspect on it, so I hesitate to go into too much detail there. Just to say that one question that did pop into my mind was that many of those migrants that were referred to, of course, live in those countries. So they would not necessarily have to travel. So they would not necessarily be suffering from any kind of blockade. And plus, if I understand correctly, I think at the moment this type of measure is not really used anymore in the EU. It was done in the first wave for some time, but then also it was not really fully. It was never a full blockade, let's say. There was always a possibility to travel. In particular, people who, if it was your country, you could always still go there. And of course, for the migrants living there, it is their country. So I think those are perhaps some elements to take into account. Then I was very grateful, in particular, for the last presentation on security, because this is something indeed that I referred to that we also really want to increase, and indeed going beyond just, if we can say it like that, just the North Korea nuclear issue. So I'd be very interested to meet up later with Professor Jun to have a more in-depth discussion on this. Indeed, how we also can encourage Korea to perhaps participate more, and perhaps also to indicate that we have a program now which is being rolled out. It's called Enhancing Security Cooperation in and with Asia. It is a program directed at 5 countries in the Indo-Pacific region, and Korea is one of them. And we hope to have increased cooperation in 4 areas. There are counterterrorism, crisis management, cybersecurity, and maritime security. And this is something that we hope to start working on together with Korean counterparts. So I would be very interested to have further exchange with on this with Professor Chun. And then perhaps there was an indirect question in her presentation on the Pacific Indo strategy. And indeed, there's now a 3rd member state, the Netherlands, which now has a Indo-Pacific strategy published as well. And I can say that the EU has started its own work on this. So I do think that there's no timeline yet, but I think that in the coming weeks, months, we will, as an EU, also will come up with an Indo-Pacific strategy where indeed also security will be an important aspect. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. John. 오창현 교수님, 한 3분 정도.
Dr. Oh, perhaps 3 minutes, please. In the interest of time, I will just make my comments very brief. I'm from Korea University's Nordic Benelux Center. My name is Changyong Oh. Thank you very much for the invitation. I actually have a question to the last speaker. Oh, actually, my question goes to Dr. Kang. After a potential no-deal Brexit, what kind of impact will it have on the Korean economy? You did mention that there is a Korea-UK FTA signed already, ready to take effect. But despite that, if there is a no-deal Brexit, I think there could be a significant impact on the Korean economy. So if you could elaborate on that a bit, I would appreciate that. And also, I would like to talk a little bit about the presentation made by Dr. Chang. You have done an analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on the immigrants in EU. So thank you very much for that data-based analysis. And I think you seem to have focused a lot on, what is visible at hand, and you have focused on the border control. But I think perhaps there are broader issues of the conflict between the immigrants and the mainstream society. And also, there are a sense of hatred towards, foreigners, or I think so. This hatred is something, or phobia is something that you could perhaps talk about a bit, because this has an impact on the refugees or the immigrants. And also, Asian immigrants in Europe are probably going to be impacted also by COVID-19. So if you could talk a little bit about that as well. I think these are some issues that we could talk about in addition to the impact of COVID-19 on the immigrants in EU.
So I would like to raise two specific issues or suggestions now that we have the EU delegation's presence about Korea-EU cooperation. So the first is about digital trade. And so digital trade is becoming more and more important. And especially with the COVID-19, we see the importance of digital trade growing ever larger. And we are still setting the rules in governing digital trade. And because the EU is always very good at setting the rules, and they always try to lead the world in rule setting. So Korea has very big potential from cooperating with the EU in rule setting in digital trade. And also, Korea has yet to acquire the adequacy for the GDPR related to digital trade. So I think Korea needs to try to get this adequacy for the GDPR to get it faster. And so we should use our cooperation for Korea's getting this adequacy. And in general, we need to cooperate more in rule setting in digital trading. And the second suggestion is that working on Korea-EU economic relation, I always get the impression that the EU's visibility in Korea compared to its actual importance is relatively significantly lower than that of the US, for instance. So because we have the presence of EU delegation, I wanted to raise this issue that we need to work together to increase the EU's visibility in Korea, at least to make it at par with its actual importance for Korea.
예, 질문도 있고 코멘트도 있고 하기 때문에 일단 발표자들을 이끌어서
So we have heard some comments and questions, so I would like to ask the presenters to respond back to the questions that were raised.
그래서 말씀을 좀 해주시면 좋겠습니다. 먼저 예, 강유덕 교수님.
Perhaps Dr. Kang, just briefly, could you comment on the question?
예, 한영 FTA가
Korea-UK FTA cannot offset all the negative implications of a no-deal Brexit. And if a no-deal Brexit were to happen, we will have direct and indirect implications for Korean companies. But of course, the relationship that will follow such a no-deal Brexit between UK and EU is going to be very important, but it's not something that we can actually address ourselves. It's an external factor that we will have to try to respond to. But of course, we will have to focus on the factors that we have some control over, and FTA with the UK was one of them. And we do hope that a deal is reached between UK and EU. Or if that is not immediately possible, maybe an extension could be possible for the transition period. Dr. Zhang, would you respond to the question?
Yes, thank you very much for your comment. So there is a high proportion of foreign population in the EU, but yes, your comment was correct. That doesn't mean that there's always a high volume of travel, but there are some seasonal migrants. And seasonal migrants and their movement is a kind of an indicator for human-to-human exchange within the EU. So it's not like a linear relationship, but definitely migrant presence can have some impact, and migrants tend to be impacted by the COVID-19 more. So that can, and also conflicts are really important. I also experienced that as well. Well, the virus started first in China. So when some people have negative impression towards Asian people, I guess in a way it's quite understandable. I also experienced that as well. But it's something that political leadership can help to address.
Dr. John, are you still connected? Are you online?
예, 전 연결해서 혹시 하실 말씀
Dr.
있으세요?
John, would you like to comment?
예,
Can you hear me? Yes, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bogart. I really want to meet you too. And I think the COVID-19 gave us another opportunity for us to enhance our security cooperation in terms of FTA. Because with this, with COVID-19, we found that the importance of online training, and I think we could actively use that between EU and the Korea training institutions. Another point is, I think that touches on the comment by Dr. Zhou, why EU's presence doesn't appear as much as it should be. I think EU-Korea relationship has been very cordial, so it doesn't touch any politically controversial issues in Korea. But with the Indo-Pacific strategy by EU, Netherlands, and other EU countries, I think we could talk more politically controversial issues in constructive forms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor John Haewon, for your comments and reply. And lastly, Mr. John Bogart, do you have any comments or reply about the digital trade, GDPR, or?
Well, I've had it a few times now already in my short time here that there seems to be an impression in Korea that that in the European Union is a place where there's a lot of hatred, a lot of racism, and these kind of things. And I do want to kind of address that issue. I think, as was indicated, there are many migrants in Europe. There's a lot of freedom of movement, and I do want to underline that most of all this goes in a very harmonious way. And I think the presentation also showed how very important the migrant workers are for our societies. And I think, in large, they are very much. That is very much appreciated and acknowledged. I think, being here, I've not experienced it myself, but I've heard from quite a number of my colleagues that they've also experienced problems here on their COVID for foreigners in Korea, that they have experienced forms of racism as well. So I would just underline that I think maybe it was translation also, but to use the term hatred that strongly, I think I really want to counter that by saying that we all have problems. Nobody is perfect, but we address those issues. And overall, I think Europe is a beautiful place where very many different people manage to work and live together very harmoniously, and there's a strong interest to increase that. So I do find it. Maybe we do need to have broader discussion of this on the perception of Korea in Korea on the EU, because I do think there is a misunderstanding that maybe goes into the lack of visibility as well. I mean, I think that is something that we encounter everywhere. I think the EU is a strange animal. Of course, it's not a country. It's not something that is easily understandable abroad. Of course, you all know the UK. You all know France, you know Germany, but we still indeed have a lot to do to explain that the EU is kind of hopefully bringing out the best of all these different countries. So I very much appreciate your offer of working together on that, and to indeed to no longer punch below our weight, as we say. It was interesting to hear Dr. Jun indeed. You know, when things go well, people are not so interested. And indeed, I think the EU-Korea relations are very well. There are not many bad parts, there are not many irritants. And so that indeed that leads perhaps to a less high level of interest by newspapers and things like this. But it's a general issue that the EU contends with. So thank you very much for your offer. And also I think I agree with you that we should cooperate on rule setting on digital trade, but not only digital trade, but I think in all fields. I think EU and Korea are two partners that can really set the world stage for this. And on the GDPR adequacy, I think a lot of work is being done at the moment. Really a lot of work. I get a lot of emails on this, and I'm quite positive that this is an issue that can be. It's not something that needs to be resolved, but a process that can be finalized relatively soon. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. We have 19 sessions being conducted as part of the Global Korea Convention 2020. And as I read in the vision statement, inclusive multilateralism and sustainability, peace, and mutual accountability are very important values that we espouse at this convention. And I think these values can be, realized through Korea-EU cooperation. And I hope that partnership and solidarity on espousing these important values between Korea and EU will happen and grow and expand. And there are various issues. Of course, we can focus on the political dialogue, but there are various issues that we need to dialogue on with EU, so we can continuously expand our realm of cooperation with EU. With that, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you.